in the BRICS, the chairmanship or the presidency, chairmanship rotates each year. Last year it was in South Africa, this year it's in Russia. And a lot of people, James Rickards, who I'm friendly with, I had the good fortune of talking to him about this last July in person down here at Rick Rule's conference in Boca, and he was under the impression that they would issue a common settlement currency, and I use the word specifically, or settlement currency, in August. Last year they didn't. He also said a couple things that I've been saying for 3 years, that the Eurasian Economic Union, which are all the former Russian countries that end in STAN, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the largest financial and regional financial and military organization on the planet, that they're going to join the BRICS. In fact, the president of Belarus just called for a summit to do just that. They're going to join. Neither of these things happened in August. But what did happen was that they said, listen, we need to go back to the drawing board. And I want you to bring all your finance ministers back to the meeting in October, this coming October in Russia, present your findings on a common settlement currency. In the meantime, we want to trade in local currencies with one another and settle things that way. So if you realize that Sergei Glaziev, who was the Russian finance minister that for 3 years said that they will have a common settlement currency and it will be pegged to a basket of commodities and a basket of currencies of the countries that are involved, understand this first and foremost, that I believe the commodities he's talking about largely is gold. And the reason I say that is that in 2019, the Bank of International Settlements, which is the most powerful bank in the world, the central banker's central bank, reclassified gold as the only tier 1 reserve asset next to U.S. Treasuries, the only other one. It's been for 75 years, basically, U.S. dollars and treasuries were tier 1 asset for a central bank, riskless. Gold, out of the blue, is also tier 1. And if you look at the amount of gold that the central banks have been buying largely since 2017 quietly, and then repatriating their gold, like the Bank of India just repatriated all their gold from the Bank of England. All of the Saudi Arabia just repatriated all their gold from the New York Fed, as did several African countries, as did the Bundesbank of Germany, the Dutch National Bank, the Bank of Austria, Poland, Hungary, Turkey, the Schectman. They all repatriated their gold, and they have been buying more gold as a group over the last 3 years than any time in central bank history. Coincidence? I don't know. It's the only other tier 1 asset in the world, as according to the BIS, the most powerful bank in the world. Sergei Glaziev said it will be backed by gold or commodities, this new currency. So I believe what they are doing is simply this. What they have been doing is you get Russia trading with, let's say, India for oil, and they take rupee. And, then they take the excess rupee and they'll end up buying gold or commodities with it. Saudi Arabia has been trading with China, selling oil and getting yuan, which is immediately convertible into gold in the Shanghai Gold Exchange, kilo bars. You look at Brazil, they're selling the second largest exporter of corn in the world. They are only dealing in yuan now, and they canceled contracts with the United States, as did China. Just canceled huge wheat contracts with Australia and the United States, buying them from Russia and paying for it in yuan, which is immediately convertible into what? The only other tier 1 asset in the world on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, as is Brazil with corn and soybeans. So what they have done, first and foremost, over the last year is sell treasuries and buy gold to replace treasuries. You go back to the year 2000. Treasury market's been really, since 2000, hasn't done much at all with the low interest rates, right? But if you look at what gold has done, it's up 900%. It's way outperformed the bond market. It's outperformed the stock market. It's outperformed the S&P. It's averaged 9.5% or so per year compounding. The S&P like 7.5%, 8%, even with reinvestment of dividends. And so when you talk about the performance of the bond market, it's way outperformed the gold market. But what does it have? It has a gold is an asset that simultaneously carries no counterparty liability. It can't be defaulted on. It can't be sanctioned or stolen. So they are selling treasuries and if you look at the treasury holdings, China's down to 700 billion. They were at 3 trillion. They're selling treasuries slowly, not too fast, to spike rates and to cut off their nose to spite their face, but fast enough, or slowly enough rather, to accumulate commodities across the board, which they view, I think, Commodities have a greater value than currency at this point. Zoltan Pozsar, who used to be at the Fed, a very smart man, said we are now in Bretton Woods 3. Remember Bretton Woods 1 when we became the pound sterling, took over for the pound sterling. Bretton Woods 2 loosely when we became the petrodollar. Bretton Woods 3, he says, is a system that will be defined by transparency, a la blockchain, and commodities, a la gold. And that's what these countries are doing. Now, we will find out which of the 36 countries are going to be admitted that have formally applied. And I think what they're waiting for is to have mass, a large enough mass where, to your point, if, let's say we have a BRICS settlement currency, and to me, gold, see, right now, the settlement and all of these deals, like Iran just did a deal with China to modernize their biggest airport, worth several $billion they're paying for it in oil. All of these things would have settled in dollars, and excess reserves would have gone into treasuries. Chipping away at the settlement status of the dollar is all of these countries using their local currencies to do transactions. Chipping away at the reserve status of the dollar is the shedding of treasuries, which is the reserve, and buying gold instead of treasuries. So you're chipping away both at the reserve and the settlement and the reserve status of the dollar. So what they're waiting for is this. If you have enough countries, let's say you have 50 countries that represent 75% of GDP, the majority of human population, all this stuff, you can trade and get the BRICS settlement currency with whichever country you do business with. But then if you want to buy something, if you, instead of taking rupee and having to deal with India, you can get the BRICS settlement currency and buy whatever you want from any of the 50 countries that have goods and services to sell. And then the proceeds, the excess reserves, are piled into gold, at least for now, until they issue or have a vibrant enough bond market. That's a long ways away. It won't be the rupee, it won't be the yuan, it won't be any of these single currencies that will be a reserve currency. But what it will be is a common settlement currency that has the potential to morph into a reserve currency. And in the meantime, they will take commodities that will replace treasuries, which can be weaponized. And that's where I think we're heading. So do I think that there will be a common settlement currency, common reserve currency? Yes, over time there will be. But, you know, at this point right now, we're not there. But the settling in local currencies and the buying of gold instead of treasuries is chipping away at the dollar hegemony little by little, for sure. As China and Japan and Russia and Saudi Arabia and all of these countries are shedding U.S. treasuries, who's been buying them in large part? It's us. The hedge funds, the money markets, the mutual funds, the people chasing yield have been buying the treasuries as central banks have been selling and buying gold and commodities. And you can look at a graph of the Chinese acquisition of gold versus their divestment of treasuries, and it's like this. And this is the rest of the world. They're selling treasuries and buying gold because not only has gold outperformed the treasury market, it has no counterparty liability. It can't be sanctioned or confiscated from a foreign nation, the way that treasuries have. We've proven treasuries can. If we do not align ideologically, well, we're going to take it from you, let alone inflate it away. And so when you look at a debt burden the way that we have, my mentor, Richard Russell, God bless his soul, used to say 15, 20 years ago, the Fed, when we only had a $15 to $17 trillion debt, that the Fed was trapped and they had two choices, inflate or default, inflate or die, he always used to say. And I would say that there's a third choice, and that is to find a villain, and that is Xi Jinping and OPEC and Putin, to incentivize the world to move away from the dollar by allowing these countries to unite under the BRICS flag, by pushing OPEC away, by signing executive order to go green. And it aligns with Jared Bernstein's ideological views. You know, Jared Bernstein, I'm sure many people have seen this guy's ridiculous interview that they were showing snippets of it on Twitter, where he was trying to explain how the bond market works, how the Treasury sells bonds, how the government prints money. It was the most humiliating thing I've ever seen come out of the mouth of the lead economic advisor of the U.S. government. But if you go back and research him and title Jared Bernstein in the search bar, Dethrone King Dollar, you'll find a report that he wrote. It was picked up by the New York Times, or statements he made to the Washington Post when Trump threw tariffs on China, asking or saying, good, maybe we'll lose the reserve status. His whole thesis is to lose the reserve status. It's a privilege we can no longer afford. So you have a an executive order to go green when the linchpin of the dollar hegemony is our relationship with OPEC and Saudi Arabia. For them to, for protection, they will value oil in dollars and recycle the excess in treasuries. Well, they are no longer selling oil just in dollars. You see these mutual deals or these deals in local currencies amongst countries where example, Saudi Arabia sells oil to China for yuan and it is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. So, you know, gold is now replacing the treasury bond, in my opinion, because it has no counterparty risk and has massively outperformed the bond market in the last since the beginning of the century. And the settlement outside of dollars chips away at the dollar hegemony, and the excess reserves not going into treasuries, in fact being sold, going into gold, chips away at the reserve status.